Sitting here in Poets' Corner with memorials to hundreds of wonderful writers, it seems the perfect place to discuss the importance of children's literacy.
Everyone assumed it was a typical royal engagement. At first, a gentle summer wind wafted across Kensington Palace's manicured lawns where media outlets and invited guests gathered for the Prince and Princess of Wales' charity address. Journalists anticipated the usual polished speeches, a few smiles from Princess Charlotte, possibly a wave from baby George, and another perfectly staged photo op that would dominate headlines for the next 24 hours. But what happened in front of the cameras was far from routine. Prince William, tall and resolute, took a step forward not with cards or teleprompters but with determination in his gaze. Princess Catherine stood by his side, poised yet beautiful, her hand resting lightly on Charlotte's back. Prince George stood beside them, gazing at his father with eyes far older than his age. And there in front of the entire nation and the world, the Prince of Wales delivered a declaration that would shatter decades of royal tradition and forever alter the monarchy. "Today," he said, "we start a new chapter honoring the past while looking forward with confidence." At that point, rumors spread like wildfire across the crowd. But it wasn't until William evoked the late Queen Elizabeth, her vision, her gentle encouragement, her unspoken hopes for the future of this family, that the gravity of the situation really hit home. Then followed the words that shattered the monarchy's foundations, effective immediately: "My family will play a larger public role as Her Majesty intended. My daughter Princess Charlotte will begin her official duties as a representative of the crown." The audience gasped. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Behind the cameras, palace officials moved anxiously. It wasn't simply the announcement. It was the symbolism. The young princess, barely a teenager, enters the spotlight with the poise of a future queen. And behind her, her parents' strong, unwavering presence, not just heirs but leaders. But there was more. King Charles and Queen Camilla were absent during the announcement. There is no word from the throne, no benediction from the current monarch. Just silence. And in that hush, the message was deafening. Something had changed. This was not a symbolic appearance. It was a transfer of authority in spirit if not necessarily in title, a quiet coronation for influence. The royal family had just made a significant pronouncement and the future now belonged to William, Catherine, Charlotte, and George. Behind the royal doors, not everyone was celebrating. Rumors had been circulating beneath the glossy surface of the British monarchy for months if not years. Whispers in Westminster, subtle changes in etiquette, and a visible shift in public mood had all pointed to one unmistakable truth. The old guard was dying and the royal family's destiny was being secretly rebuilt behind palace doors. Although King Charles III had lately ascended to the throne, the atmosphere around his rule had already become stale. From the moment the crown was placed on his head, the monarchy was no longer propelled by youthful admiration or the mystique that surrounded the late Queen Elizabeth II, but rather by awkward appearances, lukewarm speeches, and a queen consort Camilla whose approval ratings struggled to rise above the surface. Meanwhile, William and Catherine were advancing in every measurable manner. Their popularity was not only a matter of tabloid opinion. It was backed up by statistics. Polls routinely ranked them as the most trustworthy and admired members of the royal family. Their engagements garnered larger crowds, international attention, and viral moments that kept them at the forefront of the public's mind. Not only did they look the part, but they also felt the part. The new face of monarchy, fresh, modern, they are unwavering in their commitment to duty while eschewing obsolete traditions. However, something more subtle was going on behind the scenes. Sources close to royal advisors began leaking details to the press, just vague enough to be denied but specific enough to pique public interest. Briefings indicated that William had attended secret talks with senior Commonwealth leaders. Unverified sources indicate that Catherine has taken on informal advisory positions typically designated for senior royals. There are also reports of Princess Charlotte attending media-prepared sessions much earlier than George did at the same age. Some dismissed the reports as fanciful. However, within palace circles, the movement was closely monitored, especially by Camilla, who had long worked to keep her position not just beside the king but at the center of royal power. Then came the Queen's rumored final letter. Before her death, Queen Elizabeth was reported to have written a series of confidential correspondence which were kept secret and only released after her death. One letter was addressed to King Charles, one to Prince William, and another was rumored to be intended for Catherine. What did it say? Nobody knows for certain. But what is known is that shortly after the Queen's death, William and Catherine began acting differently. They appeared more confident and strategic, less deferential to Charles and Camilla. At one time, it was alleged that William declined to attend a high-level meeting hosted by Charles, opting instead to visit a children's cancer unit in Manchester where he garnered more media attention than the king did in London that day. It was a silent insurrection, not too loud, not treasonous. However, it was deliberate. Tensions arose over the line of succession. Though Prince George remains the heir after William, there has been rising controversy about Princess Charlotte's role, fueled by the media and internal royal critics. Many people praised her charisma, command of public events, and ability to reflect the natural elegance of her mother and late grandmother, Princess Diana. Some even question whether the line of succession may eventually grow to give her greater authority than was planned. However, none of this had been confirmed. Behind the royal curtains, there was nothing but rumors, speculation, and quiet power whispers. Until now, with a single public pronouncement delivered by William rather than Charles, the supposition became a reality. The palace no longer felt like a cohesive unit under a single king. Instead, it suddenly had two centers of gravity, the seated king who was gradually fading into the background and the Prince and Princess of Wales who bravely stepped into the vacuum. And with Princess Charlotte walking forth alongside her father, the message became clear. The monarchy's future had come and it didn't wait for permission. The absence of King Charles III during the historic pronouncement was not simply noticeable. It was tangible. There was no word, no wave, and no pre-recorded message for the public. For a king who once spoke incessantly about his vision for a modernized crown, his abrupt departure from public life during one of the most pivotal occasions in recent royal history drew eyebrows and questions. Behind the towering gates of Buckingham Palace, a crisis was brewing. In the weeks preceding the revelation, royal insiders noted the king becoming more reclusive. Charles's public appearances were quietly cancelled, attributed vaguely to fatigue and scheduling conflicts. He had always been fastidious, almost obsessive, about his calendar. So when formal obligations began to disappear, it was clear that something was wrong. Initially, royal aides dismissed concerns. A top official even told the press that the king was simply taking a well-earned pause after a relentless first year on the throne. However, private insiders close to the monarch described a far more chaotic reality. They thought Charles was battling with relevance rather than disease. The reality was difficult to swallow. After decades of waiting in the wings, his time had arrived. However, rather than reveling in public love, Charles found himself in the shadow of his son. Wherever William and Catherine went, they were greeted with warmth, praise, and enthusiasm. In contrast, Charles's appearances were frequently stiff, chilly, and antagonistic, particularly when accompanied by Camilla, whose image remained divisive. Inside the palace, tension grew. The king apparently disagreed with senior advisors on how to deal with the growing momentum behind William's public image. There were rumors that Charles intended to reassert his authority with a daring Commonwealth tour or a high-profile worldwide conference, but nothing materialized. Every proposal ran into practical or political roadblocks. Then came the rumors that Charles was considering stepping aside, not abdicating or publicly resigning, however, handing increasingly more tasks to William under the cover of modern monarchy restructuring, according to some insiders, began as early as Queen Elizabeth's final months. That Her Majesty, in her private wisdom, had pushed Charles to serve as a transition monarch, preparing the people for a smooth handover to William in the coming years. But Camilla would not have it. She had waited her entire life to become queen. She had faced scandals, jeers, and humiliation, only to be sidelined just as she had secured the throne. Never. According to intimate sources, Camilla was passionately opposed to any shift in royal power that did not center on her and Charles. She saw William and Catherine's public announcement as a direct threat to the monarchy's hierarchy and an insult. Even Camilla's fury couldn't undo what had already happened. Charles, overpowered by the shifting seas, preferred to retire rather than resist. He retreated from public visibility, leaving a void that was rapidly filled by William's confident voice. The royal family had always taken pleasure in its unity. But the split was clear at this point. The king was absent. The queen consort became outraged, and the audience watched William, Catherine, and their children take center stage with admiration and optimism. Within the palace, the message was frightening. The crown may still lay on Charles's head, but power had already shifted elsewhere. As the golden beams of afternoon sunlight illuminated the Kensington Palace gardens, the cameras began to roll. Millions tuned in live from the UK and throughout the world, expecting the usual royal formality, an exquisite speech from William, a supporting grin from Catherine, and possibly a cute wave from George or Charlotte. But what followed was nothing short of historic. Prince William, famed for his placid demeanor, went up to the podium with a confidence rarely seen at royal occasions. The customary platitudes were gone. The carefully choreographed motions were gone. This was not your typical royal engagement. It was a line in the sand. And standing next to him, not aides, not a senior courtier, but his wife and children, the embodiment of a future monarchy. He began by praising his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, describing her legacy, unshakable dedication to duty, and quiet strength that had guided the country through wars, recessions, and scandals. But then, in a moment that sent shock waves through every royal correspondent and analyst in attendance, he pivoted. "Today," William said, his voice firm, "we start something new. Tradition is not abandoned. Rather, it is evolved. The crown is not a relic. It is a living promise, a vow to serve. And that promise belongs to the future." Then came the moment nobody could have predicted. He turned to his daughter, young Princess Charlotte, clad in a powder blue coat with her hair neatly parted and appearing every bit the royal even in her youth, and gently guided her forward. "Princess Charlotte," William stated to the shocked audience, "will perform her first official duty as a representative of the crown. In the next months, she will start shadowing engagements with her mother. She'll learn what it means to serve, and eventually she will help define a new vision for our family's role in this country." The audience gasped. Even seasoned royal watchers were taken off guard. It was not only symbolic, it was strategic. The moment communicated a clear message. Charlotte was not going to be a passive royal relic. She was being groomed to take on considerable responsibility, potentially rivaling her brother George in visibility. The photographs from the announcement went viral in seconds. Charlotte, standing proudly behind her father, gave a modest smile that instantly warmed hearts on social media. Before the speech ended, side-by-side similarities to a youthful Princess Diana began to circulate. News anchors couldn't stop airing the footage, with some calling her the People's Princess 2.0. But it wasn't just about Charlotte. This was regarding William's vision. In publicly elevating his daughter, he was not only honoring her potential but also breaking away from the conventional male-dominated lines of royal power. Where previous generations would have kept Charlotte in the background, William brought her to the forefront. And Catherine, the embodiment of grace and restraint, stood behind them both. Hand gently resting on George's shoulder, conveying a different message. This family moves forward together. The audience yelled with approval. Comment sections were inundated with praise. Editorials praised the modern approach, describing it as the beginning of a new royal age. But as the acclaim erupted and the flashbulbs went off, palace insiders whispered about what wasn't on screen. The rage rising behind royal walls. Because while the world hailed Charlotte as a rising star, one woman saw only shadows emerging. Camilla. And she wasn't amused. While the public marveled at William's family's togetherness and strength on stage, the scene behind palace doors was far from peaceful. Chaos erupted in the golden hallways of royal history, with Queen Camilla and Princess Anne at its epicenter. Two women who had spent decades building out authority inside a monarchy that was now slipping through their fingers. Camilla's temper reportedly flared up as soon as Princess Charlotte's name was mentioned during the live broadcast. According to palace sources, she was outraged, believing that William's announcement was intended to harm her and King Charles's legacy. "What rights does she have?" Camilla supposedly yelled, referring to Charlotte's elevation. "She is a child. This is insane." But it wasn't only about Charlotte. It was about what the declaration meant. The start of a new royal period without Camilla at its center. For decades, she had fought her way from national pariah to queen consort, weathering popular hostility, media contempt, and even the memory of Princess Diana looming like a specter over all she did. She had assumed that she had finally cemented her position in history. And now, with a single speech, William and Catherine had changed the script. Camilla wanted an immediate meeting with top palace advisors. Some stories indicate she confronted Charles, demanding that he issue a statement restoring order and confirming the established royal system. However, Charles reportedly refused, citing exhaustion, withdrawal, and overwhelm. "Let it play out," he mumbled, a remnant of his earlier resolve. "It's already begun." Camilla was now isolated. Well, almost. Enter Princess Anne, the staunch defender of tradition who had long stood quietly in support of her brother's power. And, famed for her stern dedication to duty, was not a lover of media theatrics or public power maneuvers. While she respected Catherine's work ethic, she regarded William's remarks as risky and disrespectful of their father. She should have stayed in the shadows, and allegedly stated of Charlotte's new job. There's an order to things for a reason. Camilla and Anne found themselves linked for the first time in years, owing to common resistance rather than friendship. They attempted to collect support from senior courtiers by claiming that William's statement risked destabilizing the monarchy's public image. However, the tide had already turned. Staff who had previously loyally followed Charles and Camilla's orders were now migrating towards William and Catherine's camp. Younger aides expressed awe for Charlotte's poise. Overseas ambassadors contacted Kensington, not Clarence House. Even major media sites adjusted their tone, referring to William's family as the modern monarchy in motion. Camilla's rage only grew. A royal insider remembered her prowling the palace halls late at night, banging doors and issuing demands that were ignored. Anne, who was calmer, reportedly fled to her country home, choosing to distance herself from the circus. But no distance could change the fact the public had chosen their royal family. And it wasn't Charles and Camilla. It was William, Catherine, Charlotte, and George. The younger generation had taken over the narrative. Not through scandal or deception, but through something far more dangerous to the old guard, genuine affection from the people. And no amount of royal resistance could change that. While the media focused on Princess Charlotte's rise and William's dramatic statement, few realized the calm, strategic power behind the scenes. Catherine, Princess of Wales, the lady who had gradually, gracefully become the genuine architect of the monarchy's future. Catherine's demeanor in public remained consistent, serene, smiling, and effortlessly elegant. But beneath that placid facade was a lady who had spent years analyzing the palace's fault lines, memorizing its rhythms, and playing the long game with unrivaled skill. And now her strategy was exhibiting its true brilliance. This was not an accident. Charlotte's elevation, William's statement, and even the flawless optics of the family gathered on that platform had Catherine's signature. She'd witnessed the monarchy survive storms of scandal, betrayal, and generational divide. Where others held on to titles and traditions, she discreetly concentrated on connection with the public, the media, and the future. And while Camilla struggled to gain the public's grudging acceptance, Catherine had gained genuine love, the type that couldn't be manufactured or contrived. Every visit to a children's hospice, every unscripted giggle with a terrified school child, and every moment captured on camera between her and her children were all genuine. And sincerity had become her most powerful weapon. According to insiders, Catherine was in charge of managing the storm inside the palace in the days after the announcement. Camilla erupted, but Catherine kept mute. When in question the chain of command, Catherine refused to comment. Her restraint was more effective than any reply. But behind closed doors, she was far from docile. She met with William nightly to discuss public attitude, press reactions, and the next steps. Advisors loyal to Charles began to arrive at their camp, struck by her clarity of vision. Some even claimed that Catherine had surreptitiously commissioned internal polls months before to gauge public reaction to Charlotte taking on a more prominent position. What were the results? Overwhelmingly positive. This was not about ambition. It was about legacy. Catherine recognized that the monarchy could not survive just by preserving the past. It needed to evolve, to feel alive again. And in Charlotte, she saw not only a daughter but a symbol of everything the crown wanted to be. Modern, sympathetic, and commanding. Diana's spirit, Elizabeth's knowledge, and her own calm fire all embodied in the following generation. While Camilla's crown sparkled in photographs, Catherine's power was earned, not inherited. And now, it was undeniable. Those closest to her claimed she never celebrated overtly. There were no boasts or smug smiles. But in private, once the cameras were gone and the palace had quieted down, she stood at the nursery doorway watching Charlotte sleep and allowed herself a moment of thought. This was what she'd battled for. Not glory, not in control, stability, continuity. A monarchy that her children would be happy to shape rather than simply inheriting. Catherine the Commoner, who had once been insulted for her middle-class background, transformed into something far more powerful than a queen consort in waiting. She rose to the position of ensuring the monarchy's survival, and the palace will never be the same again. As the dust settled on the most surprising royal revelation in modern history, one truth rang throughout Britain: the monarchy's future was no longer a subject of speculation. A prince, a princess, and two heirs representing both tradition and transformation exposed it proudly and without apologies on a sunlit platform. Princess Charlotte and Prince George stood shoulder to shoulder with their parents, symbolizing more than just succession. They reflected the promise of a country seeking stability, honor, and genuine connection in an era of uncertainty and conflict. Charlotte, poised and confident, has already captured headlines and hearts. Her charisma, natural demeanor, and startling resemblance to both Princess Diana and Queen Elizabeth had captured the public's interest. But her inclusion in official royal tasks signified a significant shift. She was no longer the spare. She was now a keystone in the crown's next chapter. George, silent but vigilant, exuded the soothing serenity of a future king. Though still young, his demeanor during the announcement displayed the early signs of a leader fashioned not only by duty but also by a family that chose to nurture the monarchy with honesty rather than ego. And standing solidly behind them were William and Catherine, the architects of the new royal era. No palace memo could alter the impact of that image. It wasn't purely symbolic. It was a strategic declaration. The monarchy's strength was not dependent on gilded thrones or coded bloodline. It now stemmed from public trust, honesty, and emotional connection. The old guard, Camilla, Charles, and possibly Anne, may still maintain their titles, but the authority had shifted silently, powerfully, irrevocably. There had been a generational transition in the United Kingdom and around the world. And when Charlotte and George take their first steps into the legacy that awaits them, one thing is certain: the crown has not just weathered the storm, it has been reborn in the hands of its newest stars.